Welcome to a very special and deeply personal episode of the Rabbi Avi Show. Today, we are doing something a bit different. We aren't discussing the current situation in Israel or how to navigate our lives in ways that are in better sync with the Torah. Perhaps this is much deeper. We are honoring a life that was, in itself, a living Torah. This episode is dedicated to the memory of Rabbi Elijah Schochet, Zecher Tzadik L'ivracha. May the memory of the righteous be a blessing. Rabbi Schochet passed away on the 12th of Tevet, January 1st, 2026, 91 years of age. He was a man of towering intellect, a descendant of the Vilna Gaon, and a student of legends like Dr. Saul Lieberman and Professor Abraham Joshua Heschel. Yet, if you met him, you might first know him as the man who cupped the hands of the homeless, the fan of Bollywood musicals, or the grandfather who stayed up late faxing sports scores to his grandkids at camp. To me, Rabbi Schochet was more than a teacher. He was my mentor, my close friend, and the trusted advisor for my thesis on the responsibility of the individual to the community and the community toward the individual. He was a constant presence, checking in regularly with a warmth that made you feel like you were the only person in the world. He was also the rabbi's rabbi. For decades, leaders from across the entire spectrum of Jewish life from every corner of the globe would call him when they needed a second opinion or a guiding light. Some are convinced that he was one of the Lamed Vavnikim, the 36 hidden righteous souls upon whom the world depends. In this episode, we are going to travel through time. We will begin with a rare recording from 2015. In this derasha, this sermon, Rabbi Schochet explores the secret Jewish library of Sigmund Freud. He dives into the dark roots of sibling rivalry in the book of Genesis, Cain and Abel, Isaac and Ishmael, Jacob and Esau, and links them to the universal human craving for love and favoritism. He challenges us with a profound question. What is our personal theology? Does our insecurity lead us to kill for God's favor? Or does it lead us to lives of chesed, loving kindness, and tzedakah, righteousness? Following that recording, I'm joined with my dear friend and colleague, Rabbi Dr. Bennett Blum. Bennett is a world-renowned forensic psychiatrist who has testified at The Hague. But even more importantly, he was a devoted student and friend of Rabbi Elijah Schochet for over 30 years. Together we attempt to navigate the void left by his passing and discuss how we can amplify his example in a world that feels a little darker without him. Rabbi Schochet had a signature catchphrase, "Enjoy, enjoy." It sounds simple, but coming from a man who was deeply aware of the most painful chapters of Jewish history and also some of the most exciting events among the people Israel, saying enjoy, enjoy was a radical theological choice. He believed we have the power to interpret our lives, to choose whether we are living a life of joy interrupted by tragedy or a life of tragedy interrupted by joy. He chose the former. And he trained himself to see the beautiful neshama, the beautiful soul in every person he encountered. As his grandson beautifully noted at his levaya, at his funeral, he was a lighthouse. When a lighthouse goes dark, the ships don't stop. They must find a new way to navigate. May this episode serve as a compass for all of us trying to better calibrate our way.
Really, about 60 years ago, I was at a seminary in New York. New York Times had a large advertisement that Theodore Reich was going to be speaking at the New York Psychoanalytical Association. Reich, of course, had written a fascinating book, Listening with the Third Ear, that so many of us read. And I was anxious to hear him, especially because his topic was Freud's Jewish library. Now, there were rumors that Freud had a very extensive Jewish library that he never talked about. And a colleague of mine at the Jewish Theological Seminary, Yosef Yerushalmi, ended up writing a classical book on Freud, trying to analyze why Freud kept it a secret, that he really understood quite a bit of Hebrew. And supposedly his library had quite a number of rabbinic texts without any German translations. And one particular tractate of the Talmud, Brachot, chapter 9, about dream interpretation. Freud apparently had that one in the original. No translation into German, difficult Aramaic, and yet he apparently used it, read it. Well, Reich had really nothing much to say about that subject. But what he said that was very memorable was that Freud was fascinated by the stories in Bereshit, in the book of Genesis, which to his mind carried with them the most profound truth about the central dilemma in human existence, namely sibling rivalry. You read Bereshit from the beginning to the end. Cain kills Hevel. How does it end? Yosef's brothers want to kill Yosef. In between, you have Yitzchak and Yishmael in conflict, Yaakov and Esav in conflict. So from Freud's perspective, what really is going on? Namely, children are competing for the love of their parents. After all, God prefers Hevel's offering to Cain's offering. So Cain says, in effect, God loves him more than he loves me, and Cain is angry. And he's ready to commit murder. Yosef's brothers have a very strong case. Obviously, their father, Yaakov, loves Yosef more than he does any of them. And one doesn't have to be a Freud to figure out the reason why. Every time he looks at Yosef's eyes, he sees the eyes of Rachel, his true love in life. So why shouldn't he prefer Yosef to the grubby-looking Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, etc., etc.? The favoritism is there, and they're angry about it. Yaakov wants the blessing of his father. So does Esav. Each one wants to be the one who is loved. What do we do when we have several children and a son comes up to us and says to us, Daddy, who do you love more, me or that miserable brother? What? How do we frame an answer? What do we do when a daughter comes up to us? Mommy, you love me more than you do my brat sister, don't you? How do you process this? What do you say? From the Freudian perspective, and I still remember Reich's analysis, we desperately need love. That was the reading for this morning before Ahava Rabbah, wasn't it? We desperately need love. And so we're going to kill in order to get it. And what's going on in the world today? Killing in the name of God. Killing because that's what God wants me to do for the greater glory. Marx used to say that economics was the real problem and the real cause of war. And once economic problems are solved, the world will be in peace. Marx was wrong. I'm afraid Freud was right. The real problems are very deep within us all. We need the security. We need to know that we are loved, even that we are favored. And the challenge is to define what is it that Hashem wants from us. Does he want us to live lives of mitzvot, of chesed, of tzedek, of rachamim? Or does he need us to kill in his name and in his honor and in his glory? To a certain degree, it is our personal theology that defines who we are and what we are and what we do about the insecurities that we feel. He didn't talk very much about Freud's library that day, but he talked about Freud's appreciation for the profound insights of Sefer Bereshit, which still inspire us and still haunt us centuries later. A good day.
Bennett, welcome to the Rabbi Avi Show.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Bennett, the funeral transcripts are filled with stories of him cupping the hands of a homeless man or faxing sports scores to his grandson at camp. But then we have his 2015 drasha that we just heard, where he's diving into Freud's secret Hebrew library and the darkest roots of human insecurity. How did he bridge that? How does a man who knows the darkness Freud talked about, the sibling rivalries and the potential for violence, remain so relentlessly committed to the Slobodka ideal of Gadlus Ha'adam, the innate greatness of every person?
I actually think it's something different. I had the honor of knowing Rabbi Schochet since the early 90s, and he was my rabbi. And then he became a personal friend. So I got to know him over a long period of time. And this was much less an analysis of the flaws or failings of people. And I think for him, this was much more a recognition of what's important, what people crave. And for him, the essence of his life, of his teachings, his many, many aphorisms was geared towards appreciating the holiness in other people and appreciating relationships and helping people be and recognize the best that's inside them. And so part of that, it involves recognizing what was important to each person. You may have heard at his funeral, his son-in-law mentioned something that I had the fortune of knowing. You know, everyone in his family was his favorite.
It felt
Yes.
like that to everyone, didn't it?
And he said that. So, for example, he has one daughter, and growing up, he would always refer to her, and she knew herself as his favorite daughter. Right? And her husband, who is his only son-in-law, was his favorite son-in-law. And but for each of his children, each of his grandchildren, each of his great-grandchildren, he found something about each one that was truly special. And he had a beautiful relationship with each one that was unique, that they could claim as sort of their own relationship. And it was to such an extent that even his great-granddaughter, um, who has just started to talk, her first words were Zayda. Right?
Precious.
Everyone loved being around him. What you heard at his funeral was how he unified people. He brought people together, and that wasn't a mere platitude. That was literally how he was throughout his life. And so when he talks about Freud and Freud's understanding of people, what he was talking about is what's at a very deep level, what is it that each person needs? What is it that they crave? And what each person craves is to be recognized as being special, is to recognize that they are unique, to recognize ideally that they are loved.
Do
He
you think
approached people that way.
Did he get that from learning Freud, or did he get that? Do you think he was brought up that way? Or how did he, in your mind, how did he arrive using that methodology and living that way?
He was brought up that way. He told the story of when he was a little boy. One day I think he was walking to shul with his father. He was walking somewhere with his father, and they came up on an elderly gentleman who was walking very, very slowly. And Eli's first response as a little boy was to walk around, past
Get in
the
the
man.
passing lane and
Get
keep
in the
going.
passing lane, get going, yes. And his father stopped him and did not let him proceed, and explained to him. I don't remember exactly what the father said or how Eli would tell this, but basically the father instilled in him from that episode the importance of honoring and respecting this person who they didn't know, and the possibility that if they walked past him, that just seeing someone go past him would, God forbid, reinforce to this man his limitations, how he might have inadvertently held someone back. So Eli grew up with this from his own father, and then the same is true from his grandfather.
It just
Right?
was passed down.
Exactly.
And, he told me a story. I was visiting him in his home several years ago, and he told me a story of he was meeting with, and I don't remember all the specifics, but it was a woman who didn't have very high self-esteem, and she didn't think that she was ever going to meet someone. And she came to meet with him, and he told her he was going to have to keep the door open because it wasn't going to be appropriate for him to meet with such a beautiful woman in private. And she was not a woman that thought of herself as a beautiful woman at all. And from that, and he shared this with us, from that interaction, she ended up having the confidence to then get married and move forward with her life.
And the thing is, for him, that wasn't an empty platitude.
It was just second nature.
It was second nature. If he said she was a beautiful woman, that's what she was to him. It was that she had a beautiful neshama.
Right. He did it in a way in which he wasn't telling something that wasn't true. He was really telling the truth, but on a different level.
Yes, and that was part of his brilliance.
So the rabbi's rabbi, he was definitely referred to in the eulogies as the rabbi's rabbi. He was a descendant, actually, of the Vilna Gaon. And yet he moved to the San Fernando Valley and started a day school. He didn't just teach us Masechet Brachot, he taught us how to walk. So he came from this kind of lofty backdrop, and I know that he ended up deciding to go to the Jewish Theological Seminary because Saul Lieberman was there, and he wanted to learn Talmud at a very high level, and he ended up becoming close with Heschel as well. And yet he was a man who was able to teach us how to walk and how to behave. At the funeral, his son Dan mentioned that he was technologically behind, still using film when the world went digital, but in another way, he was centuries ahead, wasn't he? He had that third ear. Bennett, when you were in the room with him, did you feel that quiet authority that didn't need to raise its voice to be the most powerful presence in the room?
Oh, absolutely. Rabbi Schochet was both very transparent and very much aware of what his own strengths and limitations were. He knew his mind. He knew what his he knew what his values were. He knew his priorities. He had thought things through and acted on them, and he came across as being confident without being arrogant. He was an extremely humble person, and his knowledge base was unimaginably large. He was called the rabbi's rabbi for decades before his death. It wasn't only at his funeral. And in fact, Rebbeim, not just from across the U.S., but over the years I heard of Rebbeim from other countries and across the entire spectrum of Rabbanut, from every subsect of Yiddishkeit that you can imagine, would contact him if they wanted a second opinion, if they wanted some guidance, if they wanted a reference. He was the person that they called, and in fact, many people not only thought of him as the rabbi's rabbi, there were actually quite a few that I heard of who would swear that he was one of the Lamed Vavniks.
For sure.
And I heard that from people. You know how there are some people who are sort of overly enthusiastic or overly flowery in their descriptions of others. The people I heard that from regarding him were the exact opposite. They would be, very, very contained with their praise. And when even people like that would say, if there are Lamed Vavniks, he is one of them.
And for our listeners, if you're not sure what a Lamed Vavnik is, you can Google it, but it's the idea that at any given moment in time, there are 36 righteous people. Out of all the billions of people today that live on planet Earth, there's 36 people that are entirely righteous. And yeah, I concur that Rabbi Elijah Schochet was indeed one of those. And you feel, and when you're talking about somebody who perhaps was in that group of the Lamed Vavnik of group, you feel, at least I feel, and I know you must feel also, Rabbi Blum, that we are bereft. I mean, now that he's departed from this world, and even though his soul is still with us, there's something that it's tragic to lose somebody like that.
Yes, there's a constant sense of loss, and to not be Pollyannish about this, it creates an obligation, a responsibility on those of us who knew him, who loved him, who studied with him, that we have to take those characteristics as best we can, those parts of him, and do with them good in the world. Do good with them, and in fact, I know you and I have talked in the past about starting to have some classes or some types of study groups that would be done more in his style, or emphasizing his perspectives, his priorities, his way of viewing things. And I am so looking forward to being able to start doing those.
That would be a machaya, or she would say, that would be a machaya. We'll do it. So, everyone mentioned, getting back to the funeral, and the funeral was wonderful because so many people spoke and kind of brought all of this together, because he was not a person that you could talk about in front of him. He would kind of, all right, and change the subject.
Absolutely.
He didn't want to be spoken about.
Absolutely.
And I hope that, Rabbi Schochet, I know your neshama's present. We're not trying to embarrass you, but to take some of your goodness and share it with others so that people can be inspired. And he'd have to resign himself to agreeing to that. Everyone in the funeral mentioned the catchphrase, enjoy, enjoy.
Yeah.
It's a simple word, but in the mouth of a scholar who wrote about the heartbreaking teshuvot of the Bach regarding the Jews of Poland, it carries weight. And in the talk that we just heard from 2015, he said, we kill because we need to feel favored by God.
Well, some people.
Those, yes,
some
lo
people.
alenu. But
Right.
those who do kill, he
Yeah.
says, we kill because we need to feel favored. And when he says we, it's interesting because he puts himself with humanity who are even murderers. Those people are not apart from us. Those are part of humanity as well. So we kill because we need to feel favored by God, he said. But in his own life, he seemed to favor everyone. He was a questionable food critic, a fan of Bollywood musicals of all things, and a man who would write his grandchildren's school papers just to see them succeed. I didn't know that. So Rabbi Blum, how do we reconcile the erudite intellectual with the man who wanted everyone to just enjoy?
Well, he had quite a few aphorisms, right? His emphasis that his family and his friends should enjoy goes hand in hand with one of his statements that everyone could see their life as either being primarily a life of simcha that has episodes of sorrows. In other words, a life of joy, a life of plenty, a life that is full, that's interrupted by the inevitable pain, limitation, tragedies that occur in life. Or you can see your life in reverse, God forbid, that you have primarily a life of service that has only moments of simcha, right? So whichever way you saw your life, he felt you should emphasize and pay extra attention to draw out every bit of simcha that you can. And ideally, if you start out with the second one, a life of service interrupted by simcha, with practice, hopefully over time you'd come to realize it's the other way. And towards the end of his life, I got a chance to speak with him. He passed away on January 1st of this year, and so this was in December. I should say my wife and I had the pleasure. We would speak with him and his wife Penina every Friday prior to Shabbos. So anyway, I had the opportunity to speak with him about what I thought one of his kind of major lessons, life lessons, was, and I wanted to know if I got it right. And he said I did.
Wow.
Which was wonderful. So the major life lesson goes along with this question about enjoy and how you see your life. Is it simcha interrupted with surus or the other way around? And it was it was this, that at every point in our lives, every single decision, even even minor decision, we get to choose how we're going to interpret the situation. And whatever way you choose to interpret it, that becomes a way that we each kind of train ourselves to do more of that the next time. If you interpret a situation such as you're a victim and someone else is who's no good is taking advantage of you, well, over time you train yourself to see the world
deeper into
that, or you can do it the other way around. That even times when people are not living up to their potential, to put it kindly, that you can still choose to interpret it in a way that's nicer, that's kinder, that's still accurate.
Mm-hmm.
It's, again, not being Pollyannish, but whatever way it is, then when surus inevitably does come into your life, whatever way you trained yourself, all those little decisions and reactions beforehand, that's much more likely what's going to come out when the big and the serious and the tragic occurs.
So you're training yourself to be in a certain mode almost.
You're training yourself, and also in a way, in a way that I can't tell you mechanistically. It's also kind of changing the universe around you, and as you said about with the example of the one woman who had very bad self-esteem, and then as a result of how he interacted with her self-esteem, her self-confidence improved. Well, because he interacted with everyone that way, that tended to be what they would reflect back.
Yes.
Not all the time. I mean, there are no guarantees in life, but it increased the probability. So, for example, I heard that. I heard that in his last maybe 2 months. Like, he had a medical issue and had to go in and see a doctor, and his regular doctor wasn't around. So whoever was covering for the regular doctor saw him, and this was a person who did not have good bedside manner.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
We don't know any doctors like that, by the way.
No, we do not. And he was a bit gruff. Um, and apparently right after the doctor left the room, I guess his son had asked him, it was his son, one of his sons who relayed the story to me. One of his sons it was there and said, did you understand what the doctor said? And what's your understanding of what just happened? And Eli's immediate response was, apparently, I think the doctor was embarrassed that he couldn't do more for me.
And that's how he framed it.
That's exactly how he framed it. And it was immediate. That's the way that he saw people. So even someone who came in,
it was all the time.
He was like that all the time. And that's what he wanted to instill in his students, to everyone.
One of the things that I was most curious about was his relationship with Heschel. And it really started, he was a big figure at my ordination. And not Heschel, but but Schochet. I was just because really my experience in rabbinical school was a lot about Rabbi Schochet was a big part of why it was a positive experience for me.
Mm-hmm.
And so to top it all off for me, he hands me a book, and I went on a long vacation after I finished, and it was the first time I really had a decent vacation in several years. And he handed me a book, and it was called A Passion for Truth by Professor Heschel. And I had books by Heschel, and Heschel was not my thing. I had never really tried. I didn't feel like I was ready for that yet. Maybe I wasn't in the point of my life yet. But I started reading that book, and that really changed everything for me and caused me to get really deeply involved in Heschel, so much so that I even communicated with his daughter, who's a professor at Dartmouth, who, by the way, has fondness for Tucson in her heart.
Mm-hmm.
But then it caused me to just interact a lot with him about Heschel, to get all the stories and the Purim with Heschel, and how he would, Heschel could just drink and drink and drink. But the way that Eli would relay the stories and what it was like to spend time with him, walking down the street with Rabbi Dr. Abraham Joshua Heschel. It was really something to hear about all that. It just kind of opened a whole, I feel like it was because he gave me a gift, and he didn't say, I was a pupil of Heschel. He didn't talk about himself that way.
No.
But along the way, he would tell you stories, and then you put two and two together, and you're like, well, wait a second. And I would call him up. Remember one time Daniel was here, and we were learning together and trying to learn not A Passion for Truth, but Torah Min HaShamayim. I'm in the midst of trying to learn Torah Min HaShamayim, which is written, it's a real sefer written in Hebrew, rabbinic Hebrew mostly. And I would call up Rabbi Schochet and ask him questions. I remember one time I called up Rabbi Schochet and asked him a question. I was learning his book about animals, I think it was.
Yeah.
And because he gave me also his books, and I'm looking at them, they're behind you. He wrote so many important books, and we were learning them in a class that I started named A Passion for Truth after the book. And we had a question about something that he wrote, and I called him up and I was like, you know what, guys, I know the author. Let's call him up and find out what he was thinking. And I said, what did you mean by what you wrote on page whatever it was? And there was a pause, and he goes, Rabavi, I don't have the foggiest idea. And so just when you thought everything that he was going to say was going to be saturated with importance and that he could elucidate on top of elucidations, et cetera, sometimes he was also honest. And if he didn't know or he didn't remember, he would tell you that. He was just...
Absolutely. Absolutely. He was brilliant. He was also a pragmatist. I remember he told the story once at Shul. He was at a ball game. I think it was, I don't remember if it was football or baseball. Okay. Let's say for sake of argument it was football.
Okay.
Okay. I know he loved football. Actually, like both. So anyway, so he's at the stadium, and as you know, what sometimes happens, people see you and they come over and they say hello, and they introduce whoever their friends are. And so in this case, it happened to be someone who coincidentally had seats right near him. And as they started to describe as the game was going on, one of these visitors kept leaning over and trying to explain the game to him, which he let go on for a little bit. And then the person said, "Now, here's why they might do this sort of a play." To which Eli very calmly looked at him and said, "Yes, on the other hand, they might do this other type of a play because they're taking into account this attribute of this person and that." And he knew names, he knew stats, he knew.
So he just threw it in there kind of casually.
Kind of casually. So they thought he knew nothing. And in reality, he had basically almost expert level knowledge of not just the game, but the specific players on both teams.
Wow.
Right?
Which is really emblematic for the kind of knowledge that you really have to have in order to be the kind of posek really that he was. And like you said, he got calls from all sorts of different angles of the Jewish world, and people, I would call him too, and I'm sure you would as well, to ask him halachic questions, not only philosophical questions, but halachic questions, and also policy questions, like what should we do? And he didn't have easy answers, but he understood everything. And even in football, it's good to know even in football he knew.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yes. Now, he tended to back losing teams, but that's
very Jewish, I feel like.
That's not there.
We've lost a direct connection to a world that barely exists anymore, the world of the Netziv and the old yeshivas. His grandson said he was a lighthouse. When a lighthouse goes dark, the ships don't just stop. They have to find a new way to navigate. So I ask you, Bennett, as a rabbi, and for those of us who feel a bit lost at sea right now, what is one lesson from Rabbi Schochet's personal theology that we should use as our new compass?
I know what you're. I completely agree with characterization of him as a type of a lighthouse. At my ordination, I remember other people who, in their speeches, mentioned that he was, the type of person who you'd want to watch how he tied his shoelaces, because that too was Torah. I would say that for him, he would say something like, "Look, everybody has their strengths. Everybody has their own neshama. Everybody has their own uniqueness. So it's not possible to give a one-size-fits-all edict. But of all of the things that are possible, it would be to be honest with oneself, and honest with understanding the circumstances that you're in. Talmud Torah is exceptionally important. There's no end to learning, and it all has to be applied in the real world. You have to not try and say it can only occur in a rarefied atmosphere. One has to understand the realities of people's situations, what's important, what's unique, and you have to know And you have to know what you know and know what you don't know, and know the difference. And not be afraid to say, I don't know, to not be afraid to say, I do know, and here's what I think. And when dealing with other people, to always focus on those aspects that are truly important. Did he ever, in your classes, did he ever talk to you about, yeah, about funerals and hespedim?
I don't think so.
Eulogies?
No. What's coming to mind for you?
Well, he would say he would say things, and I don't recall if this was only at shul or if it was shul and at school, and say, as a rabbi, you're called upon to officiate at a funeral, right? It's a common occurrence. I said, what do you say about the person who died? God forbid, I'm trying to say this the way he would. God forbid, the eulogy is, let's recall her measurements. Let's recall how big his biceps were. Let's recall the size of this one's bank account.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And to do so, it would be obscene. He would usually like to use that word for describing something so offensive and so superficial. Said, truly honest and loving and caring hesped, eulogy, what do you talk about? You talk about the person's kindness. You talk about their relationships. You talk about their compassion. You talk about their Menschlichkeit. Right? You talk about...
Which is really how we should think about people all the time.
And that's the point. Exactly.
So that's the point.
Yeah. We don't... You shouldn't be saying... You shouldn't be interacting with someone, focusing on those nice aspects and characteristics of them only when they're dead.
Right? And for him, by the way, if you were going to size him up physically, he would say, talk about me like this. I was a man who was able to die from the feet up, not from the head down.
Yes.
He wanted to keep his faculties about him, which he did, thank God.
Yeah, and he got that phrase from Saul Lieberman.
Did he?
Yeah. He said Dr. Lieberman had made that comment to him that he hoped that he died from the feet up rather than from the head down. And when Rabbi Schochet said he never really understood that because he was too young. He said it was only when he was much older that the importance of that really sunk in. And that is how he, in fact, passed away.
At the end of the funeral, the Chazan chanted, Kel Male Rachamim. It asks that his soul be bound in the bonds of eternal life. But as his students, we know his soul is also bound in us.
Mm-hmm.
In the way we look people in the eye, the way we treat the fish salesman, the way we study Torah with a third ear. Rabbi Dr. Bennett Blum, thank you so much for mourning with me and with us all today, and for gracing us on the Rabbi Avi Show.
It's been my honor. Thank you.
Rabbi Albert, Rabbi Schochet here, K'tiva Chatima Tova to you, my friend, to you and yours, your loved ones, your families, all the best. Take care.